Hi guys, Joe Wolverton, Teacher of Liberty here. I wanted to come to you with a take on things, some information, some historical information you're not going to get anywhere. P.S. That's the reason for subscribing to this. If you want to hear politics and you want to hear people talk about the same old things about COVID and about the president, there's a billion people doing that. That's not my thing. My thing is to use history to illuminate our problems so that we might find a way out of them if we use history. Of course, we can just keep on doing what everyone's done generation after generation, and things will keep getting worse. Or maybe this generation that refuses to be mocked, moved, or manipulated. And we use history as our guide, okay? So tonight I want to talk to you about something about tyranny. We all know about tyranny. It's everywhere. Wear a mask. You have to stay home. You have to stand 6 feet away from people. I'm going to send federal troops into a city to tear gas the mayor. Now, I'm not talking about whether you think that's a good or a bad thing. I want you to find me where there's constitutional authority for those things, right? And I'm talking state constitution or federal constitution. But tonight I just want to talk to you about the concept of tyranny and something that is so frighteningly applicable to our day that some of you will probably not believe it until you look it up yourselves, okay? So, as always, I'm going to tell you where you can find it, all right? So, sometime in the 4th century BC, the Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote a book called Politics. The idea was he wanted to write a book inquiring about what could keep the community, in Greek, the polis, where we get our word politics, what could keep the polis, the community, what could keep them functioning well and to the benefit of the citizens of the community. So he wrote a manual on good governance that we call Politics. He called it Politics as well. All right. So book 5, for those of you scoring at home, look it up. Book 5 in Aristotle's Politics, he talks about, well, first of all, it sounds like it was written yesterday. Okay. He talks about what happens in a polis, what happens in a society when people begin to, quote, stir up factions, and that these factions have the intent of overthrowing the established order. And the way they do this is through party strife. They want to change the Constitution. And the announced goal of these revolutionaries is a desire for equality. That's out of Aristotle Politics, Book 5. That's not me summing up today. That's Aristotle saying this. What happens? What happens when you want to sniff out the very beginnings of tyranny? You want to be like bloodhounds of tyranny, like, arr. If you want to be like that about tyranny, here's the first little sniff. The first little sniff is you're going to have people in the polis, in the community, stirring up factions. You're going to have them, the goal being overthrowing the established order of things. Right? They're going to use parties fighting each other to do that. And they're going to claim that their goal is what? A desire for equality. Y'all, that was written in the 4th century BC. Sound familiar? All right, next. These factions believe that as they are equal to others in one thing, they should be equal in all things, including control over property owned by others. The people trying to abolish the Constitution, Aristotle warned, would not stop until they were given a, quote, unequal share of things due to their perceived unequal treatment in other times and in other areas. So these revolutionaries, the people trying to turn everything over, trying to subvert the Constitution, they're doing that. Why? They're saying, we feel we weren't treated fairly before, so now we're going to take your stuff from you. Because we feel like we were historically mistreated, we're going to take your stuff from you, and we are going to make ourselves equal in all things, including an equal say over your own property. Okay? Does that sound familiar? We were historically treated poorly. We're going to take your stuff and give ourselves control over it. All right. What's the motivation of these? Aristotle says it's going to blow your mind. You ready to get the Clorox wipes out? Get into a place where your mom's not going to get mad when your brain blows. Aristotle says These revolutionaries, what motivates them? Their feelings. He uses the word feelings. He asks rhetorically, what is the motivation of these adversaries of the Constitution? And Aristotle says, their feelings. All right. So the spirit of feelings, Aristotle writes, grips these people, and they try to overturn the Constitution and seize the property of others. And here's a quote from Aristotle. Those that desire this equality stir up party strife because they feel that even though they are the equals of those that have more, they are not treated equally. We have said that those who feel they ought to be greater than others start party conflict because of the state of their feelings. They're not thinking about, do I have a moral claim to the property of others? How did I get control? They're thinking, I feel mistreated, therefore I'm going to overthrow the Constitution because I see that as the source of the inequality, and I'm going to destroy stuff, and I'm going to take the property of others because I'm owed that. And that's how I feel. We're not intellectually talking about how you get control, what's the best way to do it. That's just, as Aristotle says, the spirit of their feelings. Does that sound familiar? Now, next he says that the goal of the agitators is to get gain and honor by creating conflict and partisan fighting to prevent themselves and their friends from experiencing any dishonor or loss. So instead of saying, man, you guys are destroying private property, you didn't attack the IRS, you didn't attack the Federal Reserve, you didn't attack any of these things. You're burning private property, you're destroying private property. But so instead of having to take an intellectual answer, form an intellectual response to this, these people are just saying, well, let's cast dishonor upon everyone. Find a way to make other people who challenge us seem dishonorable. Racist, right? Any way to dishonor those who challenge us. That way the discussion becomes, is that guy racist? Not, should I have burnt down this dude's house? Or should I have destroyed this building? Okay? Sound familiar? All right, next. After getting the fires of faction started, these disturbances continue, and they continue to follow their feelings because they resent others unjustly getting a larger share than them. I'm going to have a beverage real quick. You can have a beverage too. They resent people having a larger share. Okay? If the uproar and the conflagrations, if the fires don't deliver the power they are seeking, then, now listen, oh my goodness, this is Aristotle in the 4th century BC, guys. We're talking like 2,300 years ago. He says, if after the people with their moved upon by the spirit of their feelings, supposedly seeking equality, if the fires and the destruction and the party struggles aren't getting it done, what do they finally resort to try and get the power they're seeking? Quote, election intrigue. They're going to mess with the elections, Aristotle says. Let's have some electoral intrigue. Sound familiar? Guys, 2,300 years ago. All right. Now, so you don't misunderstand Aristotle's insightful understanding of the political situation that creates this sort of problem that we're in right now. He does point out that many of those who support these insurgents are motivated to migrate to that camp by the insolence and greed shown by men in office. In other words, a lot of good people will support those seeking to overthrow the order, destroy the Constitution, take control of property that doesn't belong to them, destroy things, mess with the elections. People will join with those people. Why? Because they say the people in office are insolent and greedy, and they prey on private property and raid the common treasury. And they do this for what? He says, they do this they use their, as he calls it, excessive predominance, their political power. They use this to give benefits to themselves and their friends. And what do they do with that? Giving those benefits, raiding private property, raiding the public treasury. These men in power, men in high office, Why do they do this? They do this so they can subtly set up a tyranny on the ruins of the Constitution. So do you understand what's happening now? You've got one group who feels, arguably they say they've been mistreated. And sometimes they're right. They're going to tear down the Constitution because they say that Constitution is the thing that's caused our mistreatment. They're going to destroy property. They're going to cause fires and riots. And they're finally going to use election intrigue. They're going to use parties, political parties fighting each other. They're going to use economic parties, racial. They're going to try to bring dishonor on those who disagree with them, right? They're going to make the people who disagree with them look bad so they don't have to intellectually talk about what's happening. But then what else is happening? You've got this famous pincer, right? Both sides fighting against one thing in the middle. This side's fighting the Constitution. Now you've got the men in power secretly taking publicly taking private property, right? Using their, as Aristotle calls it, excessive predominance, their high power, to take private property from individuals, raid the public treasury, all for the purpose of what? Establishing a tyranny on the ruins of the Constitution. There is no hope. These two sides squishing, pincer in the middle. All right. Does that sound familiar? People in power, political power doing that, taking private property, raiding the treasury, slowly establishing a tyranny on the ruins of what was a republic? Next. With the de facto establishment of the despotic government, the tyrants then use their extraordinary power to gradually, now this is a quote from Aristotle, gradually and little by little, without being noticed, destroy the peace and wealth of the middle class. Sound familiar? In one of the last pushes for complete control over the polis and the people, the society, the government, and property, the tyrants and the terrorists join forces. These people over here, the worst faction over here, and the tyrants, the men in political power misusing their power, they join forces to put a stranglehold on the polis, on the society, on the government. They squeeze the middle class out of any political influence by siphoning its wealth and gaining control over their property. Sound familiar? Their single policy, this group, these two groups that have formed one, two parties that act like one. I've never heard of that before. But pretend you understand what Aristotle's talking about, where two parties who pretend to be enemies somehow always work to the destruction of the Constitution. Pretend you understand that. He says, ultimately, all they want is to increase its own power and prevent others from ever threatening that power again, from ever diminishing their dominance, or from ever growing powerful enough to challenge its control. Does that sound familiar? The two parties pretending to be one that are destroying property, destroying the Constitution, secretly setting up, silently, slowly, gradually setting up a tyranny as they take the property from the middle and the wealth from the middle class, all for one sole purpose: make sure they establish permanently their own control and prevent others from ever getting powerful enough to do anything about it. You know, maybe they would use a phrase like, well, if you don't vote for a Republican or a Democrat, you're just wasting your vote. Maybe they would say something like that. I don't know. I just heard that around. So, in Book 5, Aristotle gives us a 2,300-year heads up on the policies that these two pretend different parties who act as one, on the policies that they will enact to establish permanently the tyranny and prevent people from ever having the power to do anything about it. All right? So here we go. I'm going to read these to you. Those of you with ears to hear, may you hear. All right? Number 1, ostracize outstanding men. I'm not going to explain these. Explain them to yourself. Embarrass virtuous people. Prohibit eating together outside in public places. Prohibit the meeting of clubs and other public functions. Close the schools. Keep close watch over anything in the society which would lead the people to develop confidence or pride. Close down any venues where people could gather together to discuss or debate politics. Number 8, do whatever is necessary to make it difficult for people to get to know each other. Number 9, keep the people who live in cities constantly under the surveillance of the government. Number 10, never allow the government to be uninformed about any conversation or action of citizens. Number 11, keep spies among the people. Keep them under surveillance so that people become afraid to speak openly. Number 12, cause friends to quarrel with each other. Number 13, create class warfare. Number 14, keep the people divided into groups and pit those groups against each other. Number 15, make sure the people are not able to employ private security forces, requiring them then to accept the government's police forces as their only law enforcement. Number 16, keep the people occupied with the daily demands of living so they will not have time to think about uniting to oppose tyranny. Number 17, keep the people always working but never able to increase their wealth. Number 18, tax the people so heavily so as to be able to reduce a man to poverty within 5 years. Number 19, stir up war so that the people are compelled to demonstrate loyalty to the state and to need a strong leader to guide them through this war. Number 20, as a tyrant, show that you distrust your friends and that you are in charge and that they depend on you for their power. Number 21, flatter the lower classes of people. Number 22, make friends with foreign leaders. Number 23, tear down anyone who is perceived as being superior to the tyrant. And finally, be rude and vengeful to anyone who displays an independent and free spirit or who refuses to recognize the tyrant's supremacy. Sound familiar? Thanks, guys.